Now, have you ever felt like that? That's you? Life is coming down and squishing you like a bug. That's kind of what, when I read through this, it makes me think of that. When life isn't fair, or when life squishes you like a bug. And there's an outline in the bulletin, if you grab the bulletin on your way in. But anyway, I just am using the subtitles in the New International Version where it separates this chapter into sections. So let's read together. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Now when I say you rich, now how many of you out there probably figure he's talking to you? I don't know. A lot of you would say, no way he's talking to me. I was reading this week from, worldinfo.com, and it tells us that if the poorest 20% of those that are in the United States were taken and we made a country out of the poorest 20%, they'd be one of the richest countries in the world. So don't be so sure that he's not talking to you. Well, I'm sure he's talking to you. But anyway, let's keep reading. It says, as I keep reading through verse 5, look, the wages you have failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The Lord's hearing their prayers. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. I don't know, not just those that mowed the fields, maybe those that worked in the stores and the business, at the drive-thru, in the hospital. I don't know where you work, but in all of those places, if you were to look, lots of times, those that are at the top, CEOs, their wages compared to everybody else's is phenomenal. They make so much. But life just doesn't seem to be fair a lot of times. And lots of times we do seem like we're getting squished by, like a bug, by what he labels as rich oppressors. When I said, how many of you are rich? No hands. Nobody would say. Dave Ramsey's website says that one out of every 2,000 households is made up of a millionaire in our country today. You just think about that. We're not as poor. Of course, a million's not as much as it used to be. I know that's true, but the year, 1923, the picture that you're looking at, what in the world is that? Well, it says Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. The year was 1923. At the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago, a group of, I'll just call them players, some of the richest people in the world gathered together. And they were going to, they gathered, I'll tell you, the president of America's largest steel company, the president of America's largest utility company, the president of America's largest gas company, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the president of the Bank of International Settlements, the nation's greatest wheat speculator, the nation's greatest bear and speculator on Wall Street, the head of the world's greatest monopoly, a member of President Harding's cabinet at the time. They were celebrating their financial success and maybe making a few plans about how they were going to remain dominant as individuals. And a lot of them had exploited, I'm sure, employees on their way up. And I can say, who are these guys today? And I don't, but I'm sure you don't either. But if you read the Forbes magazine, if you subscribe to it, I think it's about every May they put out who are the 400 billionaires in our country. Well, some of these guys, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Michael Bloomberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. These are guys that in our day, I don't know, there's lots of them, but these are some of the richest men in America today. Maybe James is talking to them, but maybe he's talking to us too. And I hope, literally, I would hope that they would be aware of verses like this. I don't even know if they're aware of verses like this, where God says, I hear the prayers of the people that are crying out to me that you have taken advantage of. The first thing that James says is they will reap what they sow. He says, hey, you rich guys, you weep and wail. Miseries are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted. Your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is rusted or corroded. Well, most of you know silver and gold don't rust or corrode. They tarnish. But I'm just saying, what God is saying is, lots of stuff is still going to come upon you. You've lived in luxury and in self-indulgence. Why, when you think about their closets, they got one in California, they got one in New York, they probably got one in Washington, D.C., where all the power is. They've got houses all over the place. They got closets. In their closets, they're kind of like a store that you'd probably go through. They don't even know what's hanging in the closet in that house or that house. Oh. But the world won't last forever. You're being fattened up for the slaughter. I used to live out in western Kansas. They raise all kinds of stuff out there. One of the things that the people in my church, one of the men raised hogs, or several of them did. But the whole, they'd put a hog as a little piggy. He would go over in this place. Then they'd move him to another place, and they'd get him to eat until he gained so much weight. And when all the pigs there gained so much weight, they'd put him on a bus and they moved him to another place. When it was time for the slaughter, they were feeding them everything they could eat. They were fattening them up for the slaughter. There's a lot of... Have any of you ever been to Minden, Nebraska? Minden, Nebraska. To Pioneer Village? I doubt anybody's ever been there. Caleb, did I take you? I don't know. When we lived in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, there was a place that wasn't far away from us. And there was a guy named Harold Warp that he'd made millions and millions of dollars. Very rich man. And he was from Minden, Nebraska. And if you'd like, you could go there. It's still open today. And I don't know, it says 30,000 items. There's probably 100,000 items there. He has buildings. It says 24 buildings. There are buildings full of his cars, and he's got cars. I took my parents there. I do recall taking my mom and dad to see all the stuff that was at this place. And my mom said, that was the first car that I ever drove. And see, the dude had collected cars. There were, when I say stories, you walk up another set of stairs, and there was more, and there was tractors, and there was stuff that you just wouldn't believe. There were buildings that, talked about what a kitchen looked like in 1900 and what it looked like in 1910 and how it changed in 1920, 30, when they got dishwashers, microwaves, all the way up in the things that would be added to a kitchen. I don't know, another house that we went to, we did take Caleb to this one. It was the Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. It was where Richie Rich, the movie, was filmed, and this gigantic Biltmore estate. Kathy, my wife's traveled a lot more than I have. And she went to, with her business, with her company, she went to William Randolph Hearst Castle. Unbelievable place on the Pacific Coast Highway. Just, people have amassed all kinds of wealth. And James says, you have been condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Now, was James talking to the rich man saying, you have murdered the innocent one? Is the innocent one Jesus that he's talking about there? Or is he just talking about innocent people that these individuals may have stepped on? Or just knocked for a loop to where their lives were just ruined? I don't know, but it could be you have condemned and murdered the innocent one, Jesus, because they have, and you have, and I have, we all have. Well, as I keep reading, I just want you to remember, as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment. Every one of you are going to die. I'm going to die. You're going to die. We're only going to be around here for a while. It's so hard for us to get that sometimes into our mind. You know, this is not the end of the story. The end of the story is yet to come. They will reap what they've sown. Another thing I think that James is saying is don't love stuff more than the Lord. In Timothy, Paul wrote, but if we have food and clothing, we should be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money, now notice it says the love of money, not money, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. He goes on at the end of that same chapter and he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. I have served at 4 churches in the ministry that I had for 38 years. In every single church that I ever served, there were millionaires. Now, I don't know. I didn't. I'm just saying. I don't know. When I went to Western Kansas, I went to a little church with 65 people in it when I got there. There were 6. One of the guys said, "Well, there's 6 millionaires in the building every Sunday." They didn't have a budget. They didn't need a budget. They just needed somebody to tell them what was needed, and one of them would just write a check. It was kind of a different situation. I'd never been in a church like that in my life. One of the men in the church, I noticed things about the church. The budget of this church is $360,000 a year. It's about $30,000 a week, a month, so much a week. There's a man in Western Kansas at that church I was at, and he gives away that much every year. You know, he has 500 and some odd oil wells, and he loves God unbelievably. When we moved there, he lived in about a 1,200 square foot house. Bought all his clothes at Goodwill. Just and I've met people that literally another one at another church that impressed me so much. We always called him Doc. He was a country doctor out in Norton, Kansas. He was a doctor, so he's probably better off than a lot of people. And then he was a farmer too, so as soon as he got off work, he farmed and he grew a lot of corn and all that. And he helped start a hospital because the lady that was his nurse, that her husband was an alcoholic, and she couldn't deal with it, and she couldn't get anybody to help him as he tried to get off of his drink. Well, this doctor in the church there, he started a hospital for substance abuse in that little town. Now there's 15 of them. They're all over, I don't know, Colorado, Arizona, Texas. There's a couple in Kansas. I always think there's 5 in Kansas. There's a couple in Missouri, Oklahoma. You know, they're all over. It's called Valley Hope. But this 70 to 80-year-old man, every night when we had something called the Awana that we had at our church, this 70, 80-year-old man would come into church and he would sit down with 4th and 5th graders trying to teach those kids the Bible. Because he knew out all the stuff that he had, the only thing that was worth anything was the Bible. That's all that's ever going to last, you know. It always humbled me to see this man in there helping the kids learn the Bible every Wednesday night. He'd fly in from somewhere and go to the church to teach them the Bible. Oh yeah, what happened to these guys? The rest of the story on these guys? President of the largest steel company, his name was Charles Schwab. You think of him as, you know, because of that company named after him. Well, that's not him. The president of the largest steel company, Charles Schwab, died, a bankrupt man. The president of the largest utility company, Samuel Insull, died penniless. The president of the largest gas company, Howard Hobson, suffered a mental breakdown, ended up in an insane asylum. The president of the New York Stock Exchange, Richard Whitney, he had just been released 25 years later, in 1948. He'd just been released from Sing Sing, the prison that's there in New York. Leon Fraser had taken his own life. Wheat speculator Arthur Cutton died penniless. The head of the world's greatest monopoly, Ivan Kruger, also had taken his life. Member of the president's cabinet, Albert Fall, had just been given a pardon from prison so he could die at home. Well, besides rich oppressors, the next section it talks about here is be patient in suffering. Just do what's right when you've been wronged. Just do what's right when you've been wronged. Any of you been wronged? Well, you just yourself do what's right. Sounds like something my grandmother would say, and turn the other cheek. That's the way Jesus said it. Just turn the other cheek. Drive up, go into the parking lot. Those places are too close. You get out, you accidentally bump the car next to you. Sorry, there's a guy in it. And he jumps out of his car and he runs over and he just bashes his car into the side of yours, leaves kind of a dent in the side of it. What are you supposed to do? Well, just turn the other cheek. Be patient. God's going to deal with everything, okay? Be patient. Then, brothers, James writes, and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. Here's a picture from Plainville, Kansas, where I served at one time. Now, you might not know, but they plant the wheat late August, maybe September, early September. Their whole goal is to get, they call it drilling the wheat. Their whole goal is to get that stuff in the ground for 5, 6, 7 weeks of growth. And it'll grow up just like this. It'll pop up. And when they see snow sitting on it, they're just tickled pink because they know that stuff, as it slowly melts, is feeding that wheat that's down there below, and the moisture's going in. And it doesn't do anything all winter. In fact, when I say they plant it, they get ready in August for planting. In September, for sure, they're going already planting. Well, they wait and they wait. And now in the spring, it does pop up and it grows. They got to pray for rain in March, April, May. June will begin the harvest. But the whole process basically takes, from August to June, July sometimes. It takes a long time. It takes a long, long time. Well, James is saying for us to be patient, whether it's the guy who knocked the car door into us or whether it's the rich guys that are taking advantage of us, be patient. And he also says, stand firm. You too, be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. When life's not fair, when the rich are taking advantage of you, when people aren't doing what you think they ought to be doing, just be patient and stand firm. God someday will be back and He's going to put everything back in the order it ought to be in. You ever heard of the 50-20 rule? 50-20 rule? 50-20 principle? Any of y'all know the 50-20 principle? Well, maybe you ought to write this down. The 50-20 principle. I want to give that to you. It's a big deal. It's out of Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. It says, you intended it to harm me. And this is Joseph talking. But God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Now that's the 50-20 principle. When things are going wrong, guess what? I don't know. You intended it for bad. Somebody may have intended it for bad. But God intended it for good. And now He was accomplishing it. Most of you remember the story. Joseph, his dad favored him. All the brothers hated him. Dad gave him that coat of many colors, like putting a bullseye on his back. Then he let him go off alone somewhere. What did they do? They dug a hole, threw him in it, and was trying to figure out what to do to him next. Who's going to beat him up? Who wants to take a turn hitting him now? I don't know what they were. But a group of Egyptians fly by, and they on camels, I guess, and they sell Joseph, and Joseph is taken. He goes to work for a fella. He is very trusted by this man, unbelievably. But then that guy's wife starts making passes at him, and he runs one day and leaves his coat because she still won't leave him alone. And then she lies and says, he raped me. So he's thrown in jail. Goes in jail, some things happen. Again, he's in charge of the jail before long almost. And one of the guys comes and he interprets a dream. And he says, well, if you ever get to a place of prominence, don't forget Joseph. Well, that guy didn't think anything about him anymore. But like a cupbearer for the king. But well, they finally remembered. Joseph got to go up, and Joseph got out of prison. He got in charge of the whole country, basically because his dream was about a famine. You probably remember all the story. And the brothers are there. They've come. They're starving to death. They're wanting food. And they're afraid Joseph now ought to kill them because he ought to kill them. And he said, you intended it to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You need to recall the story of Joseph when things aren't going your way. You need to remember the 50-20 principle. Maybe you wrote it down. Maybe you won't forget it. He says another thing, do not complain. In Genesis 5:9, in your suffering, when there's problems, when all these things are happening, do not complain. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Don't grumble, don't complain, don't groan, don't murmur. Don't lose it. And then it says the judge, or God, is standing at the door. He's just about to walk in. We forget about that. We forget that it's not going to be long. Jesus is going to be back and all this stuff's going to be fixed anyway. Verse 10, he goes and he says, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Look at all those guys. You can go down to Hebrews 11 and look at the Hall of Faith, if you want to call it that, and some of those people and what they went through. What about Noah? Would you like to be Noah? That was the guy who he preached for years and years and, decades and decades and decades. And he didn't have any converts except for his wife and his sons and their wives, I guess. And that was it. He was also bivocational as a preacher, I guess. And he also built a boat on the side. He was a boat builder. And God had him building this boat for something nobody had ever seen before, called rain. What about Job? I'd love for you to read right there at the first chapter of Job, where it says, and this happened before the guy and then this happened, and then this happened, and his whole world falls apart. Job, he remains faithful through it all. He does some grumbling and complaining, I have to tell you, but he says things like this: I know that my Redeemer lives. He knows the one that's in charge of this world and in charge of his soul is alive and well, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. It's natural when all the things go wrong for people to say, what in the world is going on? What in the heck has happened in 2020 to our world? What in the world is going on? God, where are you? And I know in my life, I've cried out those thoughts. I know that you have cried out those thoughts. Maybe not specifically about 2020, but about something. Why is this happening? James says, above all, my brothers, and I'm going through the chapter 5, and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you'll be condemned. The Greek word for swear is to grasp at something sacred for the purpose of supporting what you're saying, to, like swearing by heaven, or swearing by the throne in heaven, or swearing by the Bible, or, he's saying, control your words. Yes be yes, no be no. Control your tongue. Oh yeah, that was another whole chapter. We've already been through that one. James says, in your suffering, be patient. When you're being wrong, stand firm. In your suffering, don't complain. Don't swear. The old devil loves it when we attack each other, when husband's attacking wife, wife husband, parents are attacking kids. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't play those games, the games people play. Well, the third part is prayers of faith in the latter part of this chapter. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is there anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them, to anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. Now, This is one of those places where I'd make this chapter extended and take another whole week to work on that one. But anyway, let's go. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well, and the Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. It was in the early 60s. There was a young girl, just a fabulous athlete. She was swimming and she jumped into the Chesapeake Bay. Splash. That split second, this very strong young lady was paralyzed from the neck down, completely helpless and underwater. She would have drowned except for the fact that her sister swam out and got her. Her name, we call her Johnny. Johnny Erickson Tata is her name today. The doctors couldn't rescue her from her paralysis. Johnny brought together a group of her friends because of her paralysis and church leaders where she went to church. And in a private service, a week before the service, she had confessed to everybody and confessed her faith in the Lord and said, you watch out for me on your doorstep soon. I'm going to be healed. And on the appointed day of service, they read scriptures and anointed her with oil and they prayed fervently. That was 48 years ago, and Johnny is still a paraplegic in a wheelchair. Although she has changed lives all over the country. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard her speak. She's older. It's been a few years since I heard her, but probably 4 or 5 years ago, at the North American Christian Convention. I believe God heals. Now, I don't believe in faith healers. I believe that faith heals people, but not faith healers. When I was in high school, I worked for an air conditioning company, and I insulated attics in the insulated ductwork in the attics. Not attics, but the ductwork in the attics. And there was a man who, I was his helper, and he talked to me one day because he knew that I went to church and that I love God. And he said, "What do you think about faith healers?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." And he said, "Well, my son is going to die." And he said, "There's this lady who lives up in Pennsylvania. Her name was Catherine Kuhlman." And he said, "We're going to take a trip and we're going up there. We're desperate." And he went up and he saw this lady. They anointed her with oil and prayed for her. And he came back, and in about 2 weeks he was doing a funeral for that little boy. I felt so sorry for him. But anyway, I don't know. I just want you to know that God can heal. And I won't go, anyway, I don't have enough time, but I got to keep going on. You know what? James is talking a whole lot about prayer. Did you know he had another name? His other name was Old Camel Knees. You probably didn't know that either. But let me read you. Herbert Lockyer, in his book, All Men of the Bible, writes about James. And he says, James was a man who believed in the power of prayer. Because of his habit of always kneeling in intercession for the saints, his knees became callous like a camel. Thus he became known as the man with the camel knees. And so what is he saying? Oh, well, he's already said, if any of you lacks wisdom from God, anyone who lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously all without finding fault, and it'll be given to you. Well, he's already said, what causes fights and quarrels among you? They don't come from don't they come from your battles and desires, the battle within you? You desire, but you don't have, so you'll kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask. How many times have we desired something and we really just never talked to God about it? Didn't, get on our knees and pray for it. There's an old story that there's an enormous room when you get to heaven. I don't know this for sure. Of course I don't. I don't know who made this story up, but someone pictured heaven as having this enormous room with brightly wrapped packages, and you look inside and it's got all kinds of names on these packages, and the names of the ones that are there are yours and mine. And it says on the outside of the door, it says, never delivered to earth because they were never requested. I wonder what God has for you and for me that we really never just seriously started praying about. Well, here's what Old Camel Knee says. He said, when you get afflicted, pray. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Approach God boldly. Expect God to hear and answer your prayers. But also remember to offer your prayers in submission to His will. God, I want what you want for my life. Whatever your will is for my life, that's what I know is best, and that's what I want. I want $1 million, but Lord, I want what is best. You know what's best for me. I can't handle that, can I? Oh, well. Anyway, when you're sick, pray. Is anyone sick among you? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. You know, today, if you were to look into the history of our hospitals and everything, you know, the Baptist hospital, Presbyterian hospital, Catholic hospital. I know there's I think it's called Spring River Village, a place Sally used to work over in Joplin. It's the Christian churches together put this, retirement facility together. Churches care. Nobody cares like the church. Now, I've been a preacher, and so I know this. There's lots of times that you have something going on in your life, and you don't tell anybody about it. Then sometimes people like that even get mad at the church, saying nobody at the church ever cared. Well, lots of times the church doesn't even know anything about it. And so we would care if we knew. I say that. I hope that of the church. But Yale, Harvard, and Princeton, all these colleges were Bible colleges to start with. You know, our education came from, all these things so many times that you see that are good in our world. Hospitals, education. And it makes sense how that if you want some help, call the church. And I don't know, we could discuss the oil that's being put on them. Was it some type of salve or some type of something that would be good for healing, some type of medicine? I don't know. I'm just going through about James. James says, when corrupted by sin, pray. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. You know, I've been told, and you've been told, when it says therefore, what's that therefore? Well, it says, therefore, confess your sins to each other. I've seen organizations and seen groups that have basically helped people to confess their things to one another. You know, a men's encounter, women's encounter, Promise Keepers. A friend of mine at David Roadcup, I mentioned his name, helped start the Promise Keepers. Getting people to really open up and share, confess your sins to each other, pray for each other so that you may be healed. Alcohol, drugs, sexual sins, abuse, there's all kinds of things that need to be confessed. And through that confession, things can happen. God can do so many things. When specific needs occur, the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. The Greek word for prayer that's used in James 5:16 means like a specific prayer based on specific needs. But the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. You ever heard a lesson and it was like, I could have taken that or left it. And then you heard another lesson and it was like, boy, I needed to write a bunch of that stuff down. That was really great. That was powerful and effective. Well, when you pray, realize that you should pray with that type of intensity. How can you pray? Know the Bible, know the Word of God, believe His Word. Be specific when you talk to God. Have you ever prayed for something and God did it? Boom, just like that. I have. Probably you have. They did. It was in Acts chapter, I've forgotten. They were looking for Peter, and they were in the room praying. And he knocks on the door, and somebody goes. They said, Peter's at the door. And I'm like, no, we're praying for him in here, so that they'll let him out of prison. He was right outside. God had already heard their prayer before they said it, I guess, and released him early. I've had prayers where I prayed. Caleb was a little boy. My dad was 60-some years old. He had a heart attack. And I prayed, Lord, I just pray that you'd save him. I pray that this isn't right. I pray that, you know my dad and his life. Lord, you know what I've done. I love you, but I'm asking right now if I got anything to ask, I want you to keep him here. It was about 15 minutes later, the phone rang, and my mom said, the doctor said they made a mistake. Your dad didn't have a heart attack, but he does have heart problems. Stupid Larry, you know what he did? He said, those are doctors. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I bit my tongue and said, Lord, I am so sorry. Thank you for answering my prayers. How's this chapter end? Well, it's our conclusion. My brothers and sisters, if any one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from their error, the error of their way, will save them from death and overcome a multitude of sins. At my house, we're always praying for people, and we're praying for family members. We're praying for neighbors and for kids. I'm sure you pray for your kids. Maybe for a sister or a father, somebody that's not in the church and needs to be. I hope you're praying for the pastor search. I know there's going to be a service about that this week. I'm always excited to pray. Bob prayed for me before I got up here to preach to you, and I'm so excited when people want to pray. I want to pray. I've been thrilled when people would pray for me when I would speak. Dr. Howard Hendricks, professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, tells a story about a Christian that had backslidden and was away from church. Then he came back. And Howard Hendricks said, I saw the young man, and I went over to him and I said, what in the world brought you back to the church, and what was going on? And the young man said, it was like I was in a sea, out in the deep water, in deep trouble. And he said, all my friends were on the shore shouting Bible accusations of, you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that, at me from the shoreline. He said, but there was this one Christian brother that actually got in the water, and he swam out to get me. I didn't want him to get me. I fought him. He pushed me aside and he grabbed me, put a life jacket around me, and he pulled me back to shore. And by the grace of God, he was the reason that I was restored. He would not let me go. I hope that there's people in your life that you're praying for all the time like that. There are in mine. You've gotten James chapter 5. Would y'all stand? We're going to sing. We're going to sing a song just in closing. I don't know, but remember this song. It goes right along with When Life Isn't Fair. Sing with me. What a friend you have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. I started that low for you guys so you could all sing it, I guess.